Thanks.
Anything else?
No, I'm good. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? At the back? You good? Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for bringing me here. Chris. My talk is called Money is Really Good Sometimes. Let's talk about it. So who am I, first of all? I know some of you in the room already. If you Google my name, I think towards the bottom of Google is the story of when I bought a 6-foot Snorlax in the US and then had to travel over and bring it back. I don't know if this is good for my brand or bad for my brand, so I've just gone with it. I'm like a biz dev consultant person. I worked at Intel, I worked at Oculus, and now I tend to scout for different publishers and funds, primarily Oculus, Raw Fury, and then I do some indie advising as well with people like Bunny Hug, all through my company, Robot Teddy. A tip, if you need to name your company, just name it after both of your dogs, which is exactly what I did. So first of all, don't trust me. My entire job and career in this industry is pretending that I'm a nice person and persuading people to work with me in the companies that I work with. That is the case for anybody in biz dev in this industry. I would like to say, trust me, I think I'm a nice person, but specifically for this talk, everything is my own opinion, everything is my own experience. Some people may disagree with me, but hopefully what I'm going to do today is take you through some of the numbers behind certain deals, how scouts work, how the balance of power between scouts and publishers and developers work, and just some things to look out for as a developer. Most of the time during your development career, you will be offered a deal of some sort or other. Might be porting to a different platform. It might be a publishing deal for a new game. Whatever it is, it's always good to know what other types of deals are out there and what are the pitfalls of being an indie developer. So some housekeeping. I've used a lot of text in this presentation. It's not usually my style. Usually I just Google whatever words I'm talking about and find the funniest meme and put it on there. But I wanted this to have a lot of information in it. I'll allow Chris to send this out to the group if people are interested in after. It has some spreadsheet data in it and has some animations and things that might be best to look in your own time without beer. I also use the words scout, funder, and publisher interchangeably. They all mean different things, but for the sake of this talk, just imagine when I say scout or I say funder or I say publisher, I'm encompassing platforms, publishing, game funds, the Bavaria fund, everything like that where people will give you money to do something. That's what I'm talking about in this talk. I'm not specifically focusing on just one type. And again, I can only speak to the truths I know. I've left my beer over here, so I'm also going to walk over and get it. That's also my Twitter in the bottom right. I just shitpost all the time. So what is a scout? That's how I describe myself, as a scout. Scouts exist at pretty much every publisher or every company that has money to give to developers. They may not be called scouts, they may be part-time scouts, they may just be the CEO, but the scout is the first decision maker at a company. They're that first gatekeeper, if you will. People who will filter out 90% of the games that are brought to them and then take them to the rest of the company. So that's primarily what I do as a scout. Investors have these, investors from the biggest investors like Andreessen Horowitz, all the way down to game funds. Most of you at some point will have interacted with scouts. There's about 4 in this room as it is anyway. So what is a scout's job? It's to sign the good shit. Like, that is basically it. It boils down to trying to future gaze and figure out what is going to be popular 1 to 2 years down the line, which is actually impossible. And my entire job has been a trick of tricking people into believing that that's what I do. The trick is to leave before the 2 years is up, before they know, and then just go somewhere else and continue it. Every scout has different tastes, and every company has a different agenda about what they want. Some companies will focus on narrative games. Some companies just want mobile games. But it goes even deeper than that. Some scouts might hate narrative games. And even though their company might be willing to sign a narrative game, maybe they just don't understand the market or don't play those games. So it's always good to understand what that person likes. So for example, at Sony, Sean over in the US, or Gaz in the UK, what games are they into? Look at their Twitter. Look what they follow. Look what they play. Are they the right person for you to speak to? Kind of find your champion within that company. So games for any of these companies usually provide 2 things. Either they make money for the company, so a publisher will sign some games. The idea is that those games make money. The idea is that those games make enough money that the publisher enters profit and then can continue signing other games. And if you imagine a publisher would sign anywhere between 4 and 15 games a year, they can afford some failures. That's the job of a publisher, is to be able to weather those storms, as long as some of those games earn enough profit to be able to keep funding more. The other reason is improving the company in other ways. What I mean by that is maybe it's a marketing thing. Maybe they're going to get a lot less profit off signing a certain game, but it's with an IP that's very popular. So for example, Larian Studios, Divinity 2, right? Amazing game. They're now doing the next Baldur's Gate. I don't know what those finances look like, but I would imagine they're paying something for that IP, or there is some rev share off the end. So they're making less money on that, but that is a really big thing for Larian to have, and a big name for them to hang their hat on. So I want to talk about something I like to call the power shift between the publisher or the fund and the developer. So in most cases, at some point during the process of a developer deciding that they want to get money for their games, with the caveat that this is a good game, whatever that is, that people want to fund, the power dynamic between the two changes. And I want to talk about that because I think this is something that a lot of developers forget, and they will often just take the first offer that is made to them. So here's the Scouts process in general. So we'll go out and identify. That either means you've pitched me a game in my email, or it means that I've seen something on Twitter. I think I've actually signed about 80% of the games that I've signed in my career by seeing them on Twitter first, whether that's Screenshot Saturday, which I look at every week, and actually a lot of people do, or if it's just seeing a GIF that was retweeted by other people. So we'll identify a game, and now we care about that game to some degree, or at least we're interested in finding out more. Approach, again, I usually DM them on Twitter. Have your DMs open if you're a developer and you want people to DM you. I talk to other scouts, everyone does the same. Like, finding contact details on websites is okay, but if they can just look at you on Twitter first and send you a message. So this is like the approach. So now a publisher or a scout has approached you as a developer. Play, I put minimum 1 minute here. It actually takes me less than 1 minute often to decide that I don't like a game and that I don't want to fund it. And that's not me saying that I can tell within 1 minute whether a game is going to be successful or whether it's going to be a good game or whether it will have fans. But I look at, every publisher will generally look at, I would say, over 1,000 games a year. Raw Fury last year looked at 1,600 games in the year. Each one of those was played for at least a minute, and a lot of those were passed almost immediately. It just might not be good, it might not grab us, the mechanics might be horrible, but we play everything. I try to play everything that I see. So if at that point I've played it for more than a minute, hopefully, and I'm interested, now the publisher is interested in signing the game. So the power has immediately shifted. Up until that point, it is the scout trying to get that interest. And now we're at the point where it's now for the scout to explain why you should work with that publisher or that fund or that platform, right? So some of the more obvious examples is you take your game out and show it to Sony and Xbox at GDC or Gamescom or Nordic or whatever it might be, and they both show interest. Suddenly, now you're in a position where you have to figure out how to keep both of them happy, not make any of them sad, play them off each other, maybe, but without doing it in a way that jeopardizes your chances of getting a deal. This is really, really difficult. And I don't put any shame on devs who fail at this point. It's extremely difficult. So at this point, the developer usually, if I from Raw Fury said, I really like your game, I'd like to take you to kind of high-level terms and let you know how we fund stuff, at that point, the dev should go to other publishers. And hell, you should say, I have interest from Raw Fury, if you trust the person, or you have interest from another publisher. Then the negotiation and further talks, this is where the publishers have to sell to the dev. I just said earlier today I'm not in sales. It was kind of a lie. I guess 5% of my job is sales because I have to sell the idea of working with the companies that I work with versus other scouts and other publishers. This is really fucking hard because a lot of it comes down to gut feeling and liking the person that you're talking to, but actually a lot of it comes down to numbers. The one simple reasons that publishers don't publish their revenue share or publish what their deals look like is because it's so incredibly complicated to describe how a deal works and what it means for the developers in a headline without it becoming a bad headline. I could say to you this company takes 50%, this company takes 30%. To gamers with a capital G, the publisher with 50% is evil, the publisher with 30% is good. But that speaks to nothing of what those publishers are doing or what goes on behind the deal. So that is the single reason why they do not publicize it, because it is impossible to do it in an article where maybe some of the industry will read the article, but we're in clickbait headlines, and it's almost impossible. So what I'm going to try and talk about today is what those deals can look like. So I might get in trouble for this slide, but let's hope not. How do you do due diligence on a publisher? A publisher is going to do due diligence on you. I also can't say that repeatedly without falling over myself. You can, well done. So as a publisher, we'll look at your Twitter feed. We'll ask other developers you've worked with. We'll look at publishers you've worked with in the past. We all know each other. What were they like to work with? Are they good people? Et cetera, et cetera. We'll probably do a code review at this point as well if we plan to port it to different platforms. You should do your same on the publisher. Find out who they've published. If it's with Raw Fury, go and ask the Bad North devs. Go and ask the Sable devs. Look it up on Steam Spy. If a game hasn't sold very much, go and ask that developer how the publisher handled it when it didn't sell very much. Did they drop them, or did they continue trying to, get it up to a sale point for 2 years? And just do some Googling before you work with a company. Often it's, front page. If they've done something bad, you can make your own decisions from that point. So some questions to ask yourself. What is the funding for? I did some pitch reviews today of some German companies. Hello. And the main thing was, if you're asking for $200,000 or 200,000 euros, what is that for? Is that for development salaries? Is that for an office? Is that for marketing? Is that for PR? Like, be very clear what it is they're paying you for. Do they provide any services? I'll come back to that next. Do they charge you for those services? If they're going to do some marketing, are they going to pay Evolve to do your marketing for you? Or are they going to do that themselves? If they're doing that themselves, are they adding that to your debt? What is the recoup rate? I'll come to that. How many copies does the game have to sell before I, as a developer, start making money? It's the important thing. You can get funding to make a game, but if you're only getting funding to make a game and you make no money afterwards, surprise, you're a work-for-hire studio. You're just going through more lengths and making it harder on yourself. Financial-based milestones. Is that a thing, or do you just have no milestones at all? And what happens if the game fails and it goes under projections? So let's look at the types of deals that I most of the time see. There's a few caveats here. All of this is assuming that this is just for development salaries. So if I'm talking about $300,000, you can assume that is to assemble your team, pay for licenses, get some hardware, and build the game on PC only. Usually there'll be some money added to that for ports, for marketing, for PR, et cetera, et cetera. So the first type of deal, and the best type of deal, is it FF or Bavarian Fund? This is a grant, I believe. Is that right? Right? So money is given to the developer without being taken back whatsoever. So this is just free money, basically. In the UK, we have the UK Games Fund. That's between 50 and 100,000. It's just money given to you to go and prototype your game or go and build your game, go and find other funding. This is sometimes upfront. In the UK, it's upfront, I think. Or there can be an R&D stage, and then there's financial-based milestones as you hit certain things. The maximum amount of money you get from this tends to be on the lower side, because this is almost always used as a way to kind of boost local economies rather than spending $2 million on a game in the hope of making more money off it. So for example, Untitled Goose Game was given a grant by Film Victoria. So was Frog Detective. So was Knuckle Sandwich. So many of the games that you see coming from Melbourne have a grant from Film Victoria of up to, I think, $100,000 or $150,000. So yeah, sometimes platforms, very rarely platforms, local authorities, charitable causes. So if there are charities for underrepresented developers or developers from Iran and so forth, might have funding built towards that. The strings attached varies. Often it just requires credits or advertising where you got some funding from. If it's R&D funding, it can be pretty strict on how that works. The UK tax breaks, for example, your game has to tick a certain amount of boxes of being set in the UK or made in the UK or something to promote the UK economy. Okay, here's where it gets a little spreadsheety. So I don't really need you to read all of this. What I'm trying to show here, and what the important bit is this bit at the bottom. So each one of these deal types, I've built a model for them in Google Sheets and have said, If the total budget of the game is $150,000 and you're getting that from someone else, your game sells 25,000 copies at $19.99, what money do you, the developer, have at that point? So with a grant, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to start going up here. You sell $500,000 worth of game. I've accounted for store cuts and refunds about 65%. I think it's actually a little bit worse than that at about 55%. So if you sell a game for $10, you can assume you'll get about $4.50, maybe $5 from it after refunds, after tax, and after Steam's cut or whoever's cut. And this is what you've made at the end of it. This net profit is just based on that minus that. So these are the numbers you need to care about. So $325,000 after the game sells, which is great. So no recoup. Generally, games have a recoup period. I'll give you $100,000. I will say, I'm going to recoup first, then we can split. So the game sells $100,000 worth of copies after Steam's cut. I'll take that first. I have fancy animations for this later to show you. But this is kind of risky for the funder, because you're saying from day one, we'll just split it equally. And if the funder has put in a lot of money, it can take them a long time to earn back that money before they end up in the black. And the revenue split can vary. So this could be platforms. Platforms is quite common for this one. Funds, publishers. This is definitely rare. There's only a few that I know do this. There is no panic period at launch, which means you've launched the game. If there's a recoup period, you have to wait a certain amount of time for a certain amount of copies to pay back the person who gave you the money. If you don't have to do that, you're earning from day one. So whoopee. However, like we've just, at 50% from day one, we've just halved that already. So even though there's no recoup, at this amount of sales, and again, I have a fancy animation for you, we're now down to 162. So varial recoup. This can be a little complicated to explain, but the general way it works is I will say to you, I'm going to take 70% of all game sales until I've made my initial investment back. Then that recoup is going to go to 50%, and then maybe after another 2x or 3x, it's going to go to an even lower percent. So that's what I've based it on here. This is rarer than you would hope, actually. This is a nice way of doing it, because what this is saying is that we understand a developer would like to eat, and you would like to eat as you launch your game. And so we're going to give you a small amount of those profits from the game from day one to keep your studio going until you hit the fact where I've made my money back, and then we'll kind of take less, and so on and so forth. So this, 120K, and I'll show you how that works out very shortly. 100% recoup. This is pretty common. This is pretty common for publishers, and this is saying all of the money that I give you is coming back to me before you make any money off your game. And once that investment is recouped, the percentage revenue switches to something else. So in essence, the developer is earning nothing until their game has sold a certain amount of copies. So what I've got here is you have to sell at 150,000 with 100% recoup, 11,500 copies before you make anything. Now, if you think your game is going to sell 11,500 copies in the first week, then that's fantastic. 11,500 copies of a $20 game is quite a lot of copies of a game. So if you're in this world and your game is not successful, I would argue 11,000 isn't successful as such with this investment. If you don't hit that, you're never earning anything at all from this game, or it might take years. So what you'll have to do a month after launch when you realize you're not going to make revenue off the game is suddenly go back to contract work, or ideally you've picked up another game already, etc. This can be bad. It does get worse. What I've said at that point, and I think I'm just going to jump forward to the animation soon, is if the game sells $100,000 worth of copies, I'm going to take all of that and pay it off from the debt. What this model means, and this was more common in the 80s and 90s, is I'm only going to take my share, the publisher's share, and pay off the debt. The rest is the publisher's profit. This basically fucks the dev. So after 25,000 sales at $20, the developer has made $12,000, right? The first one was $326,000. So you can see how the maths quickly scales. All of these, I could get up and do a tweet saying we only take 50%. but I could be doing 50% of the first one, or I could be doing 50% of this one. And my point is, this is complicated. I had to sit down for hours and plug these models in, and this is my entire job. And what we do is we expect developers to all just know this stuff. So what my aim is to like release this at some point so people can plug their own stuff in. There's a bunch of caveats, but generally, really dig into what sort of deal it is. Here we go. So this is a grant. I'm going to have to explain this. So this is cumulative. So you've made $100,000, you've made $250,000. This is the developer share. Because it's a grant, it doesn't go back. So $100,000 goes straight to the developer. They're $100,000 so far. $250,000, the extra $150 goes over there. Now the dev has $250,000. So on and so forth. Does everyone understand this? If you don't, this is bad, because this is my simple one, and I'm fucked up if I got it wrong. So no recoup at all. I'm going to take, as the funder, 50% of what your game sells from day one. $100,000, 50 goes to the funder, 50 goes to the developer. This is quite simple as well. As we get up to $250,000, it's again 50% each. As we go up, again, it's 50% each. At the end of this, the developer has $150,000 and the funder has $150,000. What this doesn't take into account and what is not shown here is that the funder invested $150,000 at the beginning. This is basing it off the old model. So actually what's happened in this situation is the developer has had their salaries paid for 2 years of development, let's say, and now they also have $150,000 profit, right, on top of what they got paid. At this point, the funder is broken even, which means that they haven't made any money, but they also haven't lost money. So they're basically neutral. Anything from this point, the funder is in profit, but they've had to sell $300,000 worth of copies so far. If anyone wants me to stop and like re-explain the slide, I will. It gets a little bit more confusing. So variable recoup. What I've built here is until the funder has recouped their initial investment of $150,000, they will take 70% of revenue, but they're going to let the dev have 30% of revenue. That's pretty good. This is actually not that common, and I think it's a very nice model because it means that the developer is earning some money from day one. So day one, 70%. We've got a new column here because now it's all about recoup. So the funder is not in profit just yet. So 70% goes over here, 30% to the developer. Same again here. Now this is being paid off. So I'm just going to go back a sec. So this has not been paid off yet. There was no profit. This has now been paid off at $250,000, based at 70%. The funder at this point has $18,000. The developer has $82,000. This is why this is a nice deal for developers, because even from this point, you've earned $82,000, and the funder has only earned $18,000. And actually, the deal is going to swing back into your favor. You're just going to earn at a higher and higher rate. So there we go again. So this is a nice deal. If you get offered variable deals where you're earning from day one, generally it's a good thing. So this is a somewhat common funding pattern for publishers. Big caveat, this is assuming publishers are doing a shitload of stuff, and I'm going to list all this stuff out. And I'm also going to list out what I think publishers should be doing for each percentage. So let's just assume that this publisher's really, really great. They're doing a whole bunch of shit. They're very, very good. 100%, then 50%. So day one, everything is going over to the publisher. Day two, with 250, that's been paid off. They've now got 50. Now it starts to split. It's just 50-50 from this point. So this is easy to calculate, because if you get given $200,000, you have to pay back $200,000 of copies first, then you start to make money. Now, this is the fucked up way, and this is a way that I don't actually think many developers understand or realize that it exists. I did a Twitter poll a couple of weeks ago around this. It got about 300 votes on it, and my question was, if you have to pay back your recoup to your publisher first, does that come out of your share, or does that come out of the game revenue? 25% of developers had this model, which comes out of my share. So I'm going to explain this. So after recoup, 50%. So what the publisher is saying is from day one, 50% of all the revenue belongs to them. So they're going to take 50K and put that in their back pocket. They're going to take the developer's 50K and pay that towards the debt. Now, the problem here, and I'm going to jump back a couple slides, is the game has made $100,000, but there's only 50K paid off the debt. So if I jump back to here, 100% recoup from the entire revenue, and I understand this can be boring, but I do think it's important. The recoup has been paid off 100K. Okay, so it's actually taking twice as long for the game to be recouped at this point. Now, the really, really fucked up thing is, let me jump back. If the publisher spends $100,000 at this point on marketing, the game's going well, we've made some money, let's spend $100,000 on marketing, they only have to recoup $100,000. So spend $100,000, $100,000 gets added to the debt, that's how much the game has to pay for, so on and so forth. You would expect if you spend X, you'll earn Y, right? You generally don't spend $100,000 in order to make $20,000. The problem here is if the publisher pays $100,000 at this point, the game has to make $200,000 in order for it to be recouped. So when you hear stories of developers in the 80s and 90s selling millions and millions of copies of their game but never earning any money, this is exactly why. Because I can just keep spending money on marketing and keep earning profit. So again, 250. This is still the only model so far where the developer has nothing. Still, we haven't paid off our debt. 300K. Now we've paid off our debt, but the game has made 300K and we've still earned nothing. So the whole point of this is to tell you that only focusing on the top line of what a rev share is from a publisher or what a deal looks like is utterly pointless. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just focusing on the money. I'm going to cover some of the rest of the stuff as well. So the questions you want to be asking are, how does the game recoup its money? Is that from my share? Is that from the entire game? Is there recoup? Is it a grant? What rate is the recoup? I have to admit, this is all pretty high-level like analytics and math stuff, right? And as an indie dev, you probably don't have in-house analysts. So it's really important to just have a basic understanding of how these contracts work and where the money flows. And really just write it out in your head. Like what I normally do for devs is I say, okay, 100,000 comes in, and just write it down on a piece of paper as you go through the contract and figure out what the path of the money is. It's really, really important. The other important thing is to focus on more than just the numbers. So rev share, recoup, it's all meaningless without what else people are doing for you. So we're going to talk a bit about services. So I've probably missed some here. This was my 5-minute stab at what publishers will generally offer developers. Some of these are more obvious than others. QA and porting, they're usually like the accepted things that a publisher will do. You know, they will QA your game, they will port it to different platforms, they will generally help you submit, they might get you hardware from Nintendo, etc. But these start to add up into really full-stack publishers. Some publishers just focus on marketing because maybe they used to be a marketing firm, now they're just picking up games, they're not giving funding, but they're saying, we're going to do some really cool marketing for you. Or they're developers themselves, and they're going to do some QA. They're going to introduce you to their friend at Microsoft or at Sony. But are they going to do events for you? Are they going to do community for you? Are they going to do your social media? Are they, like, this is a fuckload of work. Like, you have to do this every time you launch a game, basically, right? You have to do analytics. When Steam says, we're doing a winter sale, you know, put your game on at 30% off, is that a good idea? Like, how do you know that without caring and looking at analytics? Or what price do you put your game at? Focus testing. Have you tested like other than just other developers? Like this is things that publishers can and almost should do depending on what percentage that they're asking for. Event presence is a huge thing. And this is also where you have to be careful because if you sign with a publisher that signs 30 games a year, they don't have booths to have 30 games on. So every time PAX rolls around or GDC rolls around, they're going to choose their 3 maybe top games to focus on for events. So you could sign with a publisher who says they'll do all of this and then miss out on being shown at events completely. Huge caveat. This is, in my opinion, assuming a fair recoup rate, etc. This is the percentage I think publishers are able to ask for, and where you should start asking questions if it's beyond that. So 10 to 25%. They should really be providing some funding or just a small suite of services. So this would be a company that says, hey, we're going to help you get a deal with Xbox, and we're going to do some marketing for you, and we'll do some press lists. We'll send out a press pack. That might be worth 15 or 20% to you, right? Or they might be giving you $100K for your kind of small game for finishing funds. That might be worth 25% to you. Above that, 26 to 35, 30 is a normal amount for a publisher to take. They really should be doing a larger suite of services at this point, but not full. Generally, what I see here is no funding, but they're doing a lot of services, or a lot of funding and they're doing no services. If you're giving 30% of your game and they're funding it completely and they're doing all the services, that's a really, really nice deal. 36% to 50%, 50% is a lot of your game to give. So they damn well better be doing a lot for your game. At 50%, I would expect you to be getting full funding for your game, and I would expect the publisher to do basically all of those services. The reason I say that is because I know many publishers do 50%, and they do all of that. So if you're being offered only part funding or only a very few of these, ask questions. You can look at this slide or ask other people. At this point, when you get to the negotiations part with a publisher or a fund, this is where you ask other people what their deals were. Indie devs talk. Scouts talk. It's not this big myth that everyone is operating completely in a silo. I expect every dev I work with to tell other people what their deal was, whether I tell them they're not allowed to or not, because it's human nature, and honestly, it should be okay. 51%. If you're giving more than 51% of your game away, you're basically at work for hire there, right? Or you're working on an IP. I would struggle very, very hard to find an acceptable deal that is over 50% if it's the developer's creation. What I mean by that is if you have a thought of a game and you make a prototype and you take it to a publisher, if anyone's asking for more than 50%, in most circumstances, I would say that's a really shitty deal. So the only time I would say that is different is if all you have is an idea on paper and they're willing to fund the whole thing from the beginning. There might be an argument for giving 60 or 70% away because really you've come with nothing and they've done everything other than develop your game. But I would be hard stretched to say that that's a good deal. So funding versus services. Salary funding only. They just cover the salary. They just give you the money to make your game. You're meant to do all of those services yourself. You contact your own press. You do your own events. You do your own marketing. You do your own QA. Or you don't do your own QA, but you get enough funding to go and pay a QA. So generally, this is where funds sit. If you're going to pay $300,000 for developer salaries, you probably want to ask for $400,000 and spend the other $100,000 on getting the game ported and going to events. Getting games ported, maybe $30K a platform, something like that. That disappears really very fast, depending on how complex your game is and what engine it's in. Just services, so this is assuming devs can just pay themselves. They might be successful in the past. They're really good at making games. They just don't want to do any of the other shit. They don't want to do their own marketing. They don't want to run their own socials. They just want to create games. This is where the publisher will just offer services. Salary funding and services. So this is, I'm paying you to make the game. I'm also going to do everything else. This is like most publishers kind of sit in this range, or at least publishers that do funding. And in my experience, funding from publishers generally sits in the kind of 100 to a million range. At least within Europe, that's where most people tend to sit. There's another barrier around 500,000 and above, but under that, this is basically what they do. And at the end, this is building, like taking extra money and paying, you're basically building a mini publisher around yourself. You're saying, I want lots of money because I've shipped a bunch of games before, but I don't have my own money, but I also don't want a publisher. I want to be in control of my own destiny, so just give me extra money to just build that around me. I'm gonna hire a external producer. I'm gonna hire a biz dev person to go and talk to platforms for me. I'm gonna go pay Evolve to do my PR. I'm gonna pay Pop Agenda Co to do my marketing, etc. You basically you're building a small publisher around yourselves. Now, the point of all of this is that it's incredibly complicated figuring out a deal with a publisher. And it does not stop at the point where you get a publisher interested. Don't get me wrong. There are thousands, literally thousands of games a year that want to get funding off a publisher or a fund and don't manage it. Like my job at Raw Fury as a scout involves looking at, like I said, last year was 1,600 games. We signed 4 games that year, right? So if you translate that across publishers, I would imagine probably at least 800 of those games did not get signed. For the other games that did get signed, this is the stuff you have to do. And if you just take the first deal that's on the table or take someone's word for it and don't dig through the numbers and dig through the contract, you're doing yourself a disservice. And let me tell you, the rate at which publishers sign games is so low that when a publisher finds a game it wants to sign and it's managed to get through all of its internal gates to saying, we want to give you money for your game, they really fucking want that game, right? At that point, like they really want that game. They do not want you to take that game to another publisher because they've looked at 40 games that week that they've said no to. So when you get to that point, it's on you, the developer, to make sure you're working with the right person. Generally, and I think it's extremely rare that a game gets to that point and does not get multiple offers off publishers. Now, it's human nature to be told by a developer about a game that you're kind of into that other publishers have made offers, to speed up your internal process, to be like, okay, we have to make a decision on this. Are we going to make an offer to this? Do we care about this? So all of this work, you have to do this, otherwise you're going to end up with a shitty deal. And when you make a good game, again, I don't know what that is, even though that's my entire job, when you make a good game that people want to fund, you have to do this, otherwise others are doing this. Others get good deals. Most publishers will say that their deals can't change, and that's true for some, but most of them will, change little bits and pieces or give you extra money or change the recoup rate, etc. So when you get a publisher excited about your game, go through this entire process and really focus on it. Okay. So this is me. This is who I am and why I feel comfortable talking about this stuff. So I run a company called Robot Teddy, and this is not an advert. And we're a collection of freelancers who tend to do just this stuff. We either do this on behalf of devs, although not so much, or we do this on behalf of funds or publishers. So for myself, Raw Fury, Oculus I'm signing games for, Superhot Presents is a fund that I set up at Superhot. I'll be honest, Superhot Presents is a friendly as fuck fund, but it's very rare to get funding from them. We don't do recoup, it's just 25% from day one. But we might never sign a game again because we're not built to be a publisher. Raw Fury lives and dies on signing games every year. The rest of the people within the collective do other things. Andreessen Horowitz, they invested in PayPal, Facebook. One of us is a scout over there. We help Yogscast. We help CodeSync, Indie Megabooth, etc. There's lots of stuff that we're doing. So the point of us and the point of me is I get to see a real cross-section of the industry and what sort of deals people are accepting and also what all of these people care about. So that was it. I understand that that was a lot of numbers and it was kind of detailed. The entire talk could just be distilled into do your homework, and if you find that you have interest in your game, the power is entirely in your hands to make sure you're getting the right deal. If you don't find interest in your game, either keep trying or move on to another game. There are definitely games that I've seen pitched to me 2 years ago which have just been signed now. Like, definitely, I'm not telling you to give up, but there is a definite moment where multiple publishers are interested, where you can just go for it and really get the best deal for what you do. I actually didn't go over time, which is a surprise. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if there are questions, I'm willing to take like 2 or 3 or something like that, if anyone has it. And again, I'm sorry for the numbers. I know you just want to drink, but I hope that provides a small amount of insight into like the backroom stuff that happens on the funding side. So thank you very much.
Please give it up for Callum.
Do we have any questions at all?
Any questions?
Hey, Callum.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk. You were really talking a lot of numbers and also shared that just ask your dev friends. So how important is it for you, or as a publishing scout, or also how important is it, what do you think, how important is it for a dev to have a good network of other developers to share that information?
I don't care who makes a game when it arrives in my inbox, honestly. Like I was talking to someone else today about this. The first thing I look at is the game. Does the game whet my appetite enough to care about the rest of it? Once I've seen a game that I like, I'll see who's making it. If it's a bunch of students, I might be a little wary and a little bit more focused on what are their scope of the game, do they have kind of a lot of details about what they want to build, or if they've shipped a bunch of projects before, you can usually trust better. But it doesn't affect me if they have a good network of other developers. Actually, to be honest, it's probably better for the publishers if you don't know anybody, because then you don't get to ask these questions and you don't get to ask people that have worked with them. But I want developers to be able to ask these sorts of questions. I want you to be able to talk to each other. When I worked for Oculus full-time, we used to laugh because I'd tell one developer something under a very, very strict Facebook NDA, and everyone would know within a week. And you just have to accept that, because honestly, we should be telling each other this stuff. And you can be vague. And let me be clear, you should be careful. Apple Arcade had some of the strictest NDAs I've ever seen. People did not break those NDAs for very strong reasons. So not everybody will tell you everything, but generally, you know, people who've worked with multiple publishers or people who've worked with myself, I tell devs that I'm signing, go and ask the other people who I've worked with in the past, even the games that didn't do well, and find that out. So you don't need to have a network, but I think you should use your initiative and just ask people, you know, what is this publisher like to work with? Or what deal did you get with that publisher, et cetera. So I think it's important, but it's not important for me. It's important for the dev. Any more questions? It's really hot up here. I'm sweating.
Just a small question. This was a lot of information to take in, and I wonder, is there any place where I can look this up?
So the spreadsheet screenshots that I professionally inserted into my PowerPoint, I'm going to make that a public spreadsheet where you can just plug in some of the key details. And then in the talk itself, I think it's recorded and it's going to go online, but I can also just share the PowerPoint deck with you directly afterwards. I guess I'll send it to Chris, who can send it out. I talk a lot about this stuff on Twitter, actually, about different deals or what devs should do. So you can also follow me on Twitter. But yeah, if you have like specific data you wanted to get off me, you can just contact me directly, or I'll try and send stuff out to people. But there are a few devs right now who have similar spreadsheets and similar models who are kind of agreeing to plug them all together so that devs have at least a sanity check, right? Where you can just plug in rough numbers and say, fuck, I'm not going to make any money if I take this deal, or this is the greatest deal ever. So that's what it is, right? None of it is going to be cut and dry, but it's just a sanity check. And the most important thing for me is just seeing where the money goes in the first $500,000 can be really important to whether your studio survives in the first 3 months after launch or whether it fails. So that's what's important to me. Cool. Anybody else? Nope.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Callum.